Ancient Egypt lasted 3,000 years. To put that in perspective, the United States has existed for 250 years. Ancient Rome lasted 1,000 years. The civilization that built the pyramids, that unified the Nile Valley, that created one of the first writing systems, one of the first legal codes, one of the first professional standing armies. That civilization outlasted every other empire in the ancient world by a margin so large it barely makes sense. And at its military peak, the New Kingdom, 1550 to 1070 BC, the era of Ramesses II and Thutmose III, the Egyptian army was the most sophisticated fighting force in the ancient world. 100 Zeus'an soldiers organized into divisions named after gods. 2,000 war chariots, the tanks of the ancient world, operating in coordinated squadrons with composite bows that could hit targets at 170 meters. A logistics system that supplied armies across the Sinai Desert and into Syria simultaneously, and a pharaoh who was not just the commander-in-chief. He was a living god. Now a US Army Stryker brigade has been transported to the Egyptian desert in 1274 BC, the year of the Battle of Kadesh, the peak of Egyptian military power, the moment Ramesses II commands the largest chariot army ever assembled. 4,500 soldiers against 100 Zero's Egyptian warriors, 2,000 war chariots, and a pharaoh who genuinely believes he cannot lose because the gods fight beside him. The Stryker Brigade has everything the 21st century can provide. Ramesses II has something the 21st century has forgotten: absolute certainty. The US Army Stryker Brigade, transported to the Egyptian desert in 1274 BC, consists of 4,500 soldiers, 3 infantry battalions, a cavalry squadron, an artillery battalion, and a support element. Each soldier carries an M4 carbine, body armor, night vision, and 210 rounds of ammunition. The brigade has 300 Stryker-wheeled armored vehicles, each carrying 9 soldiers and armed with a 50 caliber machine gun or 40 millimeter grenade launcher, 24 AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, 6 M109 Paladin self-propelled howitzers capable of hitting targets 18 miles away, and a drone reconnaissance element with 12 RQ-7 Shadow UAVs providing continuous surveillance. The Egyptian force at Kadesh consists of 4 infantry divisions, each of 5,000 men, the divisions of Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set, totaling 20 Zeus'an infantry, plus 2,000 war chariots, each carrying a driver and an archer armed with a composite bow. Total force, approximately 100, when including support elements, camp followers, and the pharaoh's personal guard of 1,000 elite Shurden mercenaries. Ramesses II commands from his personal chariot at the front of the army, a gold-plated vehicle drawn by 2 horses named Victory in Thebes and Mut, is satisfied because a living god does not command from the rear. The US Army Stryker Brigade arrives in the Syrian desert near the Orontes River in 1274 BC and immediately faces a problem that none of the previous scenarios in this series presented. The environment. The Mongolian steppe was harsh but navigable. The Italian peninsula was temperate. The North Sea was cold but familiar to naval operations. The Syrian desert in August 1274 BC is a different category of hostile environment entirely. 45 degrees Celsius in direct sun. 0 shade outside of the river valley. No roads, no infrastructure, no landmarks that match any map in the brigade's database. The brigade's medical officer delivers his environmental assessment within 2 hours of arrival. Without water resupply, heat casualties will begin within 6 hours, become significant within 12, and potentially mission-degrading within 24. The Orontes River is the only reliable water source within 30 kilometers. The Egyptian army, which has been operating in this desert for 3,000 years, has already secured the river crossing at Kadesh. The brigade commander, a colonel with combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, both desert environments, looks at the terrain assessment and says to his ex, "We've fought in deserts before." His XO says, "Sir, Iraq in August was 48 degrees and we had air conditioning in the Faux B." The colonel says, "And now we don't. What's our water status?" The answer is 72 hours at current consumption. The clock starts now. Ramesses II receives his first report of the Stryker Brigade at dawn through his scout network, the most sophisticated intelligence system in the ancient world. using relay riders that can transmit information 100 miles per day across the desert. The scouts describe the American force in terms that challenge every category the Egyptian military framework possesses. Metal vehicles that move without horses or oxen, flying machines that hover and fire, soldiers in strange armor carrying weapons that kill at 500 meters with a sound like thunder. Ramesses II receives these reports in his command tent at the center of the Egyptian camp and does something that no scout expected. He smiles. He has faced impossible odds before. At the Battle of Kadesh itself, history records that Ramesses II was temporarily surrounded by 500 Hittite chariots with only his personal guard and fought his way out alone. Or so the official account says. He is a man who has constructed his entire identity around the belief that divine favor makes him invincible. The flying machines and the thunder weapons are not evidence against that belief. They are, in the Pharaoh's framework, evidence for it, because a living god faces worthy opponents. He calls his generals. He says, "The gods have sent us a worthy test. Prepare the chariot divisions. We advance at dawn." The Egyptian chariot charge is the single most visually spectacular military maneuver in the ancient world, and it is specifically designed to do what it has done to every enemy the Egyptian army has faced for 200 years. Shock, terror, and the psychological destruction of an enemy's will to fight before the infantry even engages. 2. Zuzun war chariots advancing in coordinated squadrons of 25, composite bows firing at 175 meters, the thunder of 4,000 hooves on desert sand audible 3 kilometers away, the golden chariot of the Pharaoh visible at the center of the line. It has broken Persian formations, Nubian tribal armies, Hittite coalitions, and the armies of every Canaanite city-state that ever stood in Egypt's path. The Stryker brigade's drone surveillance detects the chariot advance at 6 kilometers. The brigade commander watches the feed for 90 seconds. He has never seen 2,000 chariots moving in formation. Nobody alive in 2026 has. He says to his fire support officer, "Range to the lead elements?" The fire support officer says, 6 kilometers and closing, sir. The commander says, "Paladins, fire for effect." The M109 Paladin howitzers open fire at 6 kilometers, 4 kilometers beyond the maximum range of the Egyptian composite bow. At a distance, the chariot commanders have never had to think about because nothing their enemies have ever carried could reach them at 6 kilometers. The first GPS-guided rounds impact the desert 30 seconds later. The Paladin fire mission against the chariot advance produces the most one-sided opening engagement in the series. A 155mm howitzer round impacting in the center of a chariot squadron of 25 vehicles does not need to hit the chariots directly. The blast radius, the shrapnel, and the shockwave at the point of impact is sufficient to disable every chariot and horse within 40 meters. The horses, which have never heard artillery fire, which have been specifically trained to advance under the noise of battle, which are among the most disciplined war horses in the ancient world, have no training protocol for a sound that has never existed before in the history of the horse. The chariot advance stops at 5 kilometers, not because the chariot commanders order it, because 4,000 horses simultaneously decide that the desert behind them is more appealing than the desert in front. The Pharaoh, watching from his golden chariot at the center of the line, watches his chariot division stop for the first time. He does not accept what he is seeing. He orders the advance to continue. His chariot commanders send back a message that no Egyptian general has ever sent to a pharaoh in the history of the new kingdom. The message says, "The horses will not advance." Ramesses II reads the message. He is quiet for 2 minutes, then he drives his own chariot forward alone. Ramesses II driving his golden chariot alone toward the Stryker brigade's position is the most extraordinary individual act of the series. Not because it is tactically rational, because it is not, but because it is completely consistent with everything the Pharaoh is. He has spent his entire reign constructing the image of divine invincibility. The reliefs at Abu Simbel show him alone against the Hittite chariots at Kadesh, single-handedly turning the battle. Whether that happened exactly as depicted is historically debated. What is not debated is that Ramesses II drove his own chariot into impossible situations and survived them. He is now driving it toward Apache helicopters and Stryker armored vehicles because a living god does not stop because his horses are frightened. The Apache crew that acquires the Pharaoh's golden chariot on their targeting system at 800 meters radios the brigade. Commander, the pilot says, "Sir, I have a single gold chariot advancing alone toward our perimeter," the commander says. "Say again?" The pilot says, "One chariot, sir. Gold, one man driving, coming straight at us." The commander is quiet for 4 seconds, then he says, "Do not engage. Let him come." The brigade commander drives forward in his own vehicle to meet the Pharaoh at the midpoint between the two forces, an instinct that mirrors the Pharaoh's own, recognized across 3,000 years of military protocol as the correct response to a commander who advances alone. Ramesses II stops his chariot. The brigade commander stops his Stryker. They are 40 meters apart in the Syrian desert in 1274 BC. A US Army colonel in ACU camouflage and a pharaoh in gold armor and the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, surrounded by nothing but desert and the distant sound of 4,000 nervous horses. The interpreter chain established through the brigade's historical linguistics team in the hours since arrival is functional but slow. The first exchange takes 11 minutes. The pharaoh speaks first. "You serve which god?" The colonel says, "I serve the United States of America." The pharaoh considers this for a long moment. He says, "I have not heard of this god." The colonel says, "It's not a god, it's a country." The pharaoh says, "Everything is a god." The colonel decides not to argue this point in the Syrian desert with a man in a golden chariot who genuinely believes he is divine. He says, "What do you want?" The pharaoh says, "I want to know why your weapons make thunder." The colonel says, "Because we built them that way." The pharaoh says, "Who taught you to build them?" The colonel says, "We figured it out ourselves." The pharaoh looks at him for a long time. Then he says, "So did we." The negotiation that follows the desert meeting produces the most unusual agreement in the series. The pharaoh agrees to a 7-day pause in hostilities in exchange for one thing. He wants the brigade commander to come to Thebes. Not as a prisoner, not as a subject, as a guest. He wants to show him something. The brigade commander, weighing the tactical logic of accepting an invitation from a pharaoh who commands 100,000 soldiers in his own territory, agrees. The convoy to Thebes follows the Nile south, the brigade commander and his staff in Stryker vehicles, escorted by the pharaoh's personal guard, moving through the Egyptian heartland in 1274 BC. What the brigade commander sees along the Nile in those 400 miles changes the character of the entire engagement. The Nile Valley in 1274 BC is the most productive agricultural system in the ancient world. Fields of wheat and barley stretching to the horizon on both banks, irrigation systems of breathtaking complexity, channeling Nile floodwater across land that would otherwise be desert, villages and towns connected by a river transport network, moving goods more efficiently than anything the ancient world has elsewhere achieved. The brigade commander, a man who has studied military logistics for 20 years, looks at the Nile Valley agricultural system and says to his XO, "This is what 3,000 years of optimization looks like." His XO says, "It's a machine." The commander says, "It's the most efficient food production system I've ever seen, and it runs on river water and geometry." His XO says, "Geometry?" The commander says, "Look at the irrigation angles. Every channel is cut at the optimal gradient for flow rate. Someone figured out calculus 3,000 years before Newton." The pharaoh brings the brigade commander to Karnak, the temple complex at Thebes that is the largest religious structure ever built, covering 247 acres, constructed over 2,000 years by successive pharaohs, each adding their own halls, obelisks, and sanctuaries. The brigade commander walks through Karnak for 3 hours. He has been to the great mosques of the Middle East, the cathedrals of Europe, the temples of East Asia. Nothing he has seen in any theater of operations prepared him for Karnak at dawn. The scale, the precision, the accumulated weight of 2,000 years of religious construction in stone that makes every subsequent civilization's architecture look like a first draft. He stops in front of the hypostyle hall, 134 massive columns up to 24 meters tall, arranged in 16 rows, the largest columned hall ever built, every surface covered in hieroglyphic relief carvings, documenting 3,000 years of Egyptian history. He stands in the hall for 7 minutes without speaking. The Pharaoh stands beside him. The Pharaoh says through the interpreter, "Do you understand now?" The commander says, "Understand what?" The Pharaoh says, "Why we cannot lose. Not because of our army, because of this, because of what we built, because of what we are. A civilization that builds this does not lose to anything." The commander looks at the columns. He says, "We have a building called the Pentagon." The Pharaoh says, "Is it bigger than this?" The commander is quiet for a moment. He says, "It has more rooms." The brigade commander returns to his force on day 6, having seen the Nile Valley, Karnak, the Valley of the Kings, and the construction site of Abu Simbel. The temple Ramesses II is carving into a cliff face that will still be standing 3,300 years later. He calls his battalion commanders together and gives his assessment. He says, "We can defeat their army. Every engagement we fight, we win. Their chariots cannot close to effective range against our paladins. Their composite bows cannot penetrate our body armor. Their infantry cannot stand against strikers in open desert. We win every battle." He pauses. He says, "And then what?" His battalion commanders are quiet. He says, "We are 4,500 soldiers in the middle of a civilization of 5 million people that has been here for 3,000 years and will be here for another 1,000. We have 6 days of water and 4 days of combat ammunition." He looks at his commanders. He says, "We are not fighting an army. We are standing in the middle of the most durable civilization in human history. The Romans lasted 1,000 years. The Mongols lasted 200. Egypt has been here for 3,000 years, and it is nowhere near finished. We are not going to win this by fighting. We are going to win this by leaving." His XO says, "That's not winning, sir," the commander says. "It's the only kind of winning that matters here." The withdrawal agreement is reached on day 7 in the Pharaoh's throne room at Thebes, the most ornate negotiating venue in the series. Gold and lapis lazuli on every surface, the walls covered in relief carvings of Egyptian military victories, priests chanting in the background, incense filling the air. The Pharaoh agrees to let the brigade withdraw northward unmolested. He asks for one thing. It's the same instinct that every ancient commander in this series has had when facing the US military. He asks to see one of the Apache helicopters up close, not flying. On the ground, the brigade commander arranges it. An Apache is landed in the desert outside Thebes, and the Pharaoh examines it for 40 minutes, walking around it, touching the fuselage, examining the weapons pylons, looking into the cockpit. His chief engineer examines it alongside him, taking notes in hieratic script on a papyrus scroll. The Pharaoh stands back from the Apache and looks at it from 10 meters. He says, "How long did it take your civilization to build this?" The brigade commander says, "About 5,000 years from the wheel to this." The Pharaoh says, "We have been building for 3,000 years. We have 2,000 more to go." He looks at the Apache one more time. He says, "We will get there." 4 videos into this series, the pattern that emerged with Genghis Khan and the Romans and the Vikings has produced its clearest statement. Yet in the deserts of ancient Egypt, the US military wins every battle, every single one. The technology gap is absolute. Paladin howitzers against war chariots, Apache helicopters against composite bows, night vision against desert darkness. There is no engagement in which the ancient force wins, and there never will be. But ancient Egypt revealed something none of the previous scenarios could, because ancient Egypt is the only civilization in this series that was already 1,500 years old at the time of the engagement. The Mongol Empire was 25 years old when it faced the Rangers on the steppe. The Roman Legion was 400 years old. The Viking Age was 70 years old. Egypt was 1,500 years into a 3,000-year run. A civilization that old does not measure itself by battles. It measures itself by centuries. The Pharaoh who stood in front of an Apache helicopter and said, "We will get there in 2,000 years," was not being defiant. He was being accurate. Egypt outlasted Rome. It outlasted Greece. It outlasted the Persians and the Assyrians and the Hittites and every empire that ever threatened it. The brigade commanders who said, "We are going to win this by leaving," understood something that the most powerful military in the world occasionally forgets. The most durable force in history is not the one with the best weapons. It is the one that is still there when everyone else has gone home. subscribe, because next video Alexander the Great comes to Egypt. And this time the Pharaoh doesn't get to say we will get there in 2,000 years.